I hope you're well. In this one I'm making some plywood wall cabinets for the workshop to try and contain some of the clutter in the room next door, and just for fun I'll be making them without a tape measure, a ruler or a square, and without nails, screws or any other kind of fixing. So instead of a tape measure I'll be taking overall dimensions of the space where they're fitted with a piece of cord, and I'll be using marks on a rod or story stick using relative measurements to size the final pieces. I'll just be gluing these pieces together to make these cabinets. There's some electrical conduit on the wall that I need to allow for, but like most fitted furniture, the overall width, height and depth is determined mostly by the space that's available. Enough space, I think, for two single cabinets and a double between them, though that double can't be as tall as the singles, those electrics getting in the way again. I'm dealing with the two single cabinets today, so the piece of cord I use to measure the total width of the space I can cut in half for the double cabinet measurement and in half again for the single, and then I can transfer that measurement to a stick and also trim down the height and depth story sticks as well. I'm making these cabinets mostly out of birch ply, but I don't have enough 18mm birch for the top, base and shelf, so I'll be using whatever else I have, a ragtag collection of joined together scraps of the maple veneered globulus ply that I looked at earlier in the year. The construction is going to be similar to the fake plywood joints video I did a little while back, with a 6mm outer skin and a 12mm liner that creates the rebates and the housings, the rabbets and the dados, that the 18mm ply fits into. Of course, before we get to that, we need to figure out how to make a square cut without a square. There's lots of ways you can do that. A 3, 4, 5 triangle is probably the most common, but I'm doing this one with something that I found on YouTube that just uses a pair of compasses. It's probably easier to follow the pictures than for me to try and describe it to you, but I'll give it a try. Basically, you take a baseline that's parallel to the workpiece edge. I'm just using the guardrail for this. And then you make an arc with the compasses. The actual size doesn't matter, but bigger is better. Then 2 more across that arc and 2 more again. And if you continue a line down from where the last 2 cross to the first point, then that line is 90 degrees to the baseline. Yeah, I said the video was easier to follow. If you want to go all in on the process, then you can also repeat this below the line and give yourself a longer reference point. Anyway, I can line up the guardrail and make that cut, which nicely squares off the bottom of the workpiece, and the offcut gives me a reference square that I can use for the other cuts. I'm making 2 cabinets, so I need 4 of these 6mm outer layers. And then I can trim them to the right height in one pass. Onto the 12mm liners next, and the cabinets have a 6mm back that's inset, so the liners need to be 6mm narrower than the outers. After cleaning up the end of the sheet of 12mm, I'm using the 6mm offcut as a gauge against our depth measure for this, and then cutting 4 identical strips. To work out the height of the liners, I need to allow for the thickness of the top, base and shelf. So I've lined up 3 18mm offcuts against one edge of the outer, and then with a strip of paper, this is just wallpaper, lining paper, a strip of paper butted up against those 18mm scraps, I can cut it to the height of the cabinet and then fold that in half to give me the size that the liner needs to be. I'm cutting all 4 of these at once using a stack of 12mm offcuts to help balance the rail, and I need 4 of these for each cabinet. The 18mm top, shelf and base need to be the cabinet width less the 2 6mm outers, and I'm using offcuts again as a gauge against our rod for this measurement, cutting the 2 different plywoods down to width. They need to be the same depth front to back as the liners, which happens to be the same width as the guide rail, so no gauges or measurements needed here. I'll take an easy win where I can. So these are easily cut to size. I've forgotten how splintery this veneered plywood can be, but it cleans up easily with a bit of abrasive, and I can give everything else a bit of a rub down as well. And finally, the 6mm backs need to be cut to the same width as the 18mm shelves, but I'll leave the length as it is for now and trim them back when the cabinets are glued up. I don't want to glue the cabinet to the bench, not again, so I've put down a couple of strips of masking tape, painter's tape, and then I can start putting this together. 6mm outers onto the base first, taking particular care to line up the front edges before clamping. And then I can add in the lower liners, again making sure the front edges are nice and flush. Middle shelf next. Then the upper liners. And then the top. If we wanted to, we could pop our DIY square onto the back to check for squareness, or check the diagonals, of course. But you know what, it looks pretty good to me, so I'm just going to leave it as it is for the next 10 or 15 minutes for the glue to firm up a little bit. So by the magic of YouTube, not only has this come together pretty nicely, it's also turned into the second cabinet as well. So we can get this out of the clamps and start thinking about the cabinet backs. So this is just the 6mm plywood that we cut before. It's not too bad at all, actually. It's a little bit snug, fitting there, nicely square. Just a little bit of a squeeze at the top here, so I'm just going to ease that with a little bit of P80. It's a little bit better. Don't want to force it. If nothing else, you'll squeeze all the glue out. There we go. So now we can just mark that up for the height, trim it back. And get it glued in place. With the glue set, I can give them a quick rub down to clear up any slightly rough edges and have a think about what finish, if any, I'll be applying. So there we are, two simple cabinets with a nicely rebated top and base and the middle shelf in a housing, all made entirely from a little bit of plywood of different thicknesses and all cut with just a tracksaw and a little bit of care and all the measurements taken from the space that's available, and the whole thing just glued together. No fixings needed at all. I don't actually know the dimensions of the cabinets, and I don't even know if they're properly square, but you know what, it doesn't matter because they're made to fit the space I have. I'm still going to make the double cabinet, of course. That's going to be a little bit more complex because of the housing for the central divider on the shelf. Let me know if you want to see that one, or if these two are enough. They're probably enough for me. But I'll call this one done for this week. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks to my 10-Minute Workshop Plus members, of course, for always being there. And I'll see you all again very soon. All right, take care.